Good afternoon, Culpeper Baptist Church. It is good to have you all with us, and we have some friends. You heard a little bit from them already, and they're going to tell us a little more about the people group, the Bija, and how are they doing with this COVID virus in the area there?
Well, there are probably a couple of things we could mention about this, and that's the people themselves. In certain pockets, they're quite. They can be in large cities, even though they might be a small minority within that city. Those people can be quite fearful of the virus right now because they view it as the plague. So a lot of times it's just not real obvious why people are getting this, even though we know it's germs and how germs jump from one person to another kind of thing. So we can, as one of the things I've thought about is as we spend our seconds washing our hands, we can pray for people who are in this kind of situation, who aren't in our general, group that we might hang around with normally. Also, and even people who don't have water. So those are people. Yeah, there's quite a lot of people in that category, and so they're being told to wash their hands, but they might not have water at their home. So you can pray for them.
So the countries where the Bija live are going through similar type of lockdown things, actually maybe more severe lockdown situations than we're seeing here in the U.S. Egypt, Sudan, and Eritrea all have the virus spreading. Egypt has the worst outbreak in Africa. And some of that is in the south where the Bija live, and Aswan and Cairo are the two places that are hurt the worst. In Cairo, if one person has the virus, they lock down. Cairo is a city of 10 and 12-story buildings, apartment buildings, just a massive sea of them. And if there's one person in a building that has the virus, the whole building goes on lockdown and nobody can go in or out. And the military delivers food to that building for the next 2 weeks while they quarantine it. So it's pretty challenging. They've restricted travel between cities, and it's a lot more difficult than life normally is for everyone. And so this is on people's minds, and they are very fearful, and it creates an openness. We have a friend who was able to share a lot of the gospel recently, and I think that this environment was, and this is with a person who has had a lot of opportunity to hear before, but was much more receptive. And this is within the last month. And I think that the whole virus epidemic environment has created some openness that might not have been there otherwise.
Well, that's great to hear, but you said that how many people in those 12-story apartments?
Yeah, so it depends on, it could be a lot.
Wow, that could be complicated. We're dealing with a lot here, and we don't think about that. Really could be difficult for a group of people to work through.
Yeah, so in the other countries, they take people out of their homes and take them off to a quarantine camp, which is also pretty frightening. So it's...
There have been reports of people being in the quarantine camps and then running away from them because the quarantine camps didn't have adequate facilities.
Then
like
the police
food and
have to chase them down. And of course, all travel within the countries is restricted, and travel out of the countries is restricted. It's a difficult time for everyone.
Well, it's got to be difficult for them just because they're such a social-oriented people as well, the mental strain of them having to be separated from their community.
Yeah,
must be difficult.
I think that's right. I think people are, it's scary, and they know it's serious because they're being forced to defy their own culture, basically.
Right.
Everything that's going on is countercultural.
Well, thank you for that information on that. And I know you wanted to tell us a little bit about the languages as well.
Yeah. So this picture that we're looking at shows you where the Bija live in this southeast portion of Egypt and in the eastern side of Sudan and in the northern end of Eritrea. And that's a really large area. And history has affected that spread and that people group in ways that they've developed 3 different mother tongues at this point. And so I'll move forward and show you those 3 languages. But them having 3 mother tongues adds a lot of challenge to bringing the gospel to them. On the very northern end, they are Arabic speakers, but they have their own dialect of Arabic. Okay. In the middle, they have their own language that nobody else speaks that's called Bedouin. And then on the southern end, they have a language that they share with several people groups in Eritrea and some in Sudan that's called Tigrayat or Tigray. And so trying to communicate any truth, but the gospel especially, to these people in the language of their heart, their mother tongue, is particularly challenging when you need to do it in 3 different languages. And these 3 languages are not really close to each other. There's a lot of difference between them.
Really?
So it's, as a result, for about 20 years now, there has been ongoing translation work trying to, in the case of the middle language, Bedouin, to actually write it down and give it an alphabet and a sound system and a dictionary and a grammar and all of those challenging things, along with producing educational materials and translating the Bible into that language.
So it hasn't even been a written language that long.
Before 2000, it was a completely unwritten language.
Goodness.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, 2000 is 20 years ago now. It doesn't sound like that long ago to me, but it actually is starting to become history. But it's a as far as writing languages goes, that's pretty recent.
Yes.
On the southern end, the Tigrayat language was written before. It was written down probably first in the 1800s, but it was written down in the Ethiopian alphabet that's called Fidel, which Muslims in that part of the world associate with the Orthodox Church, and they refuse to use it because they consider it to be a Christian script. And so when they write it, we usually write it in Arabic script because that's Muslim script. Of course, Arabic on the northern end is a written language and has been for a very long time. There are lots of materials in Arabic.
Right.
But at the moment, there is ongoing translation work in Tigrayat and Bedouin of the Bible, and also production of oral materials to go along with that, because these languages were not written by most people who use them. They're not read by most people who use them. So if you have a book, there's not really anybody who can read it, or not very many people who can read it. So once you produce a book, you need to record it and make it available in oral form so that people can listen to it and have access to it.
So is radio ministry very big?
Radio ministry is very important and has been. Radio ministry for Bija started about, the radio ministry started trying to produce material back in the late 90s. They had a really hard time getting started because there were not very many Bija believers, and Bija culture likes to drink coffee, not do work. And as a result, when the Western culture, European, comes in and says, we need to sit down and record this story, and it needs to be 15 minutes long, and we need an introduction and a conclusion and some little bits of radio things in between there, the Bija guy says, we haven't had our coffee yet. So the first radio guy that came in to work with Bija long term, it took him 2 years before he had any stories recorded.
Wow.
And he was working with a Bija believer, with a Christian.
And we think we have issues.
Yeah. We had a fun story. There's a ministry that does a shortened version of the whole Bible, basically, on a cassette tape they used to do. In fact, you can tell it's old because it's a cassette tape, right? But a cassette tape has 30 minutes on each side, so you get 60 minutes, and you're going to try to tell the whole story of the Bible in 60 minutes. So these guys came to Sudan, and they sat down with this Bija believer to try to record basically a little snippet from each story in the Old Testament, going from creation to Christ, in 60 minutes. And this Bija believer, they hadn't even gotten through Genesis, and he's getting really upset. And finally, they got to the story of Noah, and he put his foot down. He said, I'm not going any farther. This is not the story of Noah. You've only given it 2 or 3 sentences, and that is just not the way it works. Where I come from, when you tell a story, if it's a good story and it's true, it gets longer every time you tell it. You don't shorten the story. And so he would not go forward till they promised that he could later come and record the full story of Noah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for that information. That's all the time we have for now. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll hear some more about the Bija in the future. Thank you.